She had everything money could buy, a sprawling mansion, the best doctors, a father who could save lives with his hands. Yet, from the moment she was born, she had never taken a single step. For years, specialists tried and failed, until the day a black homeless boy crossed her path. What he did in the moments that followed would defy logic, challenge prejudice, and leave an entire community stunned. Was it a miracle, or something far more powerful? Amelia Hart was born into a life most could only dream of. Her father, Dr. Jonathan Hart, was one of the most respected surgeons in the state, a man whose steady hands and sharp mind had saved countless lives. Their home stood high on a hill, its white columns and manicured lawns a picture of success. Inside, there were marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and every comfort imaginable. But for Amelia, none of it mattered. From the day she was born, her legs had refused to obey her. Doctors from around the world had examined her, some with pity in their eyes, others with quiet resignation. She had the finest wheelchairs, the best therapists, and endless treatments, yet every birthday came and went without a single step. Her life was a routine of quiet mornings, careful schedules, and watching the world move on without her. She would sit by her bedroom window, looking out at the children running in the park below, wondering what it might feel like to join them. Still, Amelia's world was safe. Predictable. Untouched by the uglier sides of life, until the day a stranger walked into it. A boy no one would have expected to be there. A boy whose presence would not only challenge everything Amelia believed about her own body, but also force her family, and her community, to face truths they had long ignored. The morning it all began felt ordinary. The kind of day Amelia had lived 100 times before. Sunlight spilled through her window, catching the silver frame of her father's medical degree on the wall. Downstairs, the clink of china signaled breakfast being laid out by Mrs. Calloway, the housekeeper who'd worked for the Hart family for over a decade. Amelia's father had already left for the hospital, his white coat folded neatly over his arm as he hurried out the door. Her mother was away on another charity board meeting, the sort of polished social gathering where names and appearances mattered more than anything else. Amelia was alone, as usual, alone except for the quiet hum of the house. That was when she heard it. A faint, unfamiliar voice drifting in from outside. She wheeled herself to the window. Down by the edge of their long driveway stood a boy, thin, wearing an oversized jacket despite the warmth. His skin was dark, his hair matted, and in his hands he clutched a worn-out backpack. He wasn't moving toward the door, he was just standing there. Watching. At first, she thought he might be lost. But then she noticed the way his eyes lingered on the gates, on the security cameras. Not with fear. More with the cautious curiosity of someone who knew they didn't belong in this part of town. Later that day, when she mentioned it to Mrs. Calloway, the housekeeper's face tightened. "Don't worry yourself about people like that," she said briskly. "They come here sometimes, looking for trouble." The words sank into Amelia's chest like stones. People like that. She knew what Mrs. Calloway meant. She'd heard that tone before, in whispered conversations at charity dinners, in the sideways glances from neighbors when a black family drove through their neighborhood. It was the kind of subtle cruelty that dressed itself up as concern. Days passed. Amelia saw the boy again. This time he was closer, walking along the sidewalk outside their property. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. Instead, he gave a small nod, almost like a greeting. She nodded back before she could stop herself. It became a pattern. Sometimes he'd be there in the mornings, sometimes in the late afternoon. Always quiet. Always watching. And though she didn't know his name, Amelia began to wait for him. One afternoon, curiosity overcame her. She wheeled down the long driveway to the gate. "You're always out here," she called. "Why?" The boy hesitated. "Just passing through." His voice was soft, almost careful, as if weighing whether he should say more. From that moment, their conversations began, short at first, but slowly stretching longer. His name was Malik. He was 16, though he looked older, and he'd been living on the streets since his mother died. Amelia asked where his father was, but he only shook his head and changed the subject. Malik had a way of speaking that drew her in. He talked about the city as if it were alive, its streets, its hidden corners, the people others overlooked. He noticed things Amelia never had, like how the park benches were colder in certain neighborhoods because the trees had been cut down, or how some stores had cameras angled differently depending on who walked in. But not everyone welcomed his presence. One afternoon, as Amelia spoke to Malik through the gate, a black SUV rolled to a stop beside them. Two men in suits got out, security from her father's hospital. "Is he bothering you, Miss Hart?" one of them asked sharply. Before she could answer, Malik stepped back. "I was just leaving," he muttered. The men watched him go until he disappeared around the corner. That night, Amelia overheard her father on the phone. "Yes, I know who she was talking to. I've told her to stay away from him. No, I don't care what his story is. We can't have that kind of trouble hanging around." That kind of trouble. The word stung. The next time Malik appeared, there was a bruise forming along his jaw. He tried to play it off, but Amelia's eyes locked onto it immediately. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, shrugging. But the tension in his shoulders told a different story. Later, she would learn he'd been stopped by police for loitering in a shopping district he wasn't welcome in. They'd emptied his bag onto the sidewalk, scattering what little he owned, his blanket, a few clothes, and a dog-eared notebook. The injustice burned inside her. She thought of the people in her world, the ones who smiled in public but spoke in hushed, poisonous tones when no one was listening. People who locked their doors a little tighter when they saw Malik's face, who assumed guilt before hearing a word of truth. It was on a rainy afternoon when the real turning point came. Malik arrived soaked to the bone, shivering. Amelia insisted he come inside to warm up. At first, he refused. He knew what crossing that threshold could mean in a neighborhood like this. But she wouldn't let him leave. The moment they entered the marble hallway, Mrs. Calloway froze mid-step. "Amelia, what is this?" "He's my friend," she said firmly. The housekeeper's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your parents will not approve." She was right. When her father came home, the argument was swift and brutal. "You don't know people like him," he said. "They take advantage. They lie. They, she interrupted. "Or do you mean he?" The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. From then on, Malik's visits became rarer, not because he didn't want to come, but because the obstacles multiplied. Security guards patrolled the street more often. Neighbors whispered. And one afternoon, as Amelia waited at the gate, Malik didn't appear at all. The next time she saw him, he was sitting on the curb outside a convenience store, holding his side in pain. She rushed to him, her wheelchair wheels splashing through puddles. "They said I was stealing," he rasped. "I wasn't. But they didn't care." Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was help him back to the safety of the park. That night, she didn't sleep. She kept seeing his face, tired, worn, and yet still holding that same quiet strength. It was then that Malik told her something that would change everything. "I know why you can't walk," he said quietly. And I think I can help. Her breath caught. It was impossible. Every doctor, every specialist had tried. How could a boy who'd never set foot in a hospital know something they didn't? Malik leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. I just need you to trust me. The question hung in the air, daring her to believe. The rain had stopped by morning, but the streets still glistened like black glass. Amelia sat by her window, restless, replaying Malik's words over and over. I just need you to trust me. She'd spent her whole life hearing why she couldn't. Why her legs would never work. But Malik's voice had been different, not clinical, not pitying, but sure. And somehow, that certainty was more powerful than any diagnosis she'd ever been given. They met in the park, away from the cameras and prying eyes of her neighborhood. Malik was waiting under the shade of an old oak, his backpack slung over one shoulder. You're early, he said with a faint smile. I couldn't wait, she replied. He knelt beside her wheelchair, his eyes scanning her legs. It's not that your legs are broken, he said slowly. It's that no one ever taught your body how to move. They've been treating you like you're fragile, but you're stronger than they know. He began showing her movements, tiny at first. Shifting her weight, tightening certain muscles. The process was awkward, and her frustration rose fast. But Malik's patience never wavered. For days, they met in secret. She pushed herself harder than she ever had, her arms aching, her breath short. Malik would encourage her quietly, adjusting her posture, holding her steady when she wobbled. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. One afternoon, she managed to lift herself out of the chair for a heartbeat before sinking back down. It was nothing compared to walking, but to Amelia, it felt like flying. I told you, Malik said, his smile broadening. But their fragile progress shattered the day everything came crashing down. They were in the park again when a police cruiser rolled up. Two officers stepped out, eyes fixed on Malik. You fit the description, one said. For what? Malik asked, his voice steady but his jaw tight. Suspicious activity. There was a call about a homeless male harassing residents. Amelia's stomach turned. She knew exactly what this was, another baseless accusation, fueled by the same prejudice she'd seen all her life in the whispers and side glances. He hasn't done anything, she said sharply. Ma'am, please stay out of this, the officer replied, moving toward Malik. One of them grabbed Malik's arm. He didn't resist, but the grip tightened anyway. Stop. Amelia's voice cracked. You're hurting him. The officer glanced at her wheelchair, then back at Malik, as if the sight of her made Malik's presence more suspect, not less. Why are you with her? You trying to scam her family? The words landed like a slap. Amelia saw Malik's eyes darken, not with shame, but with a deep, familiar anger. I said he hasn't done anything, she shouted. Her voice drew attention. People in the park began to watch. A few pulled out phones. But instead of easing, the tension escalated. One officer shoved Malik against the cruiser. His backpack fell to the ground, spilling out the contents, a blanket, a few cans of food, and the worn notebook Amelia had seen before. The officer kicked it aside. Empty your pockets. I don't have anything, Malik said. Then it won't be a problem, will it? The crowd murmured, some filming, others whispering. Amelia's chest pounded. She wanted to move, to stand between them, but her body betrayed her, until something inside her snapped. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair, planted her feet, and pushed. For the first time in her life, she rose, not gracefully, not steadily, but enough to draw every eye in the park. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Malik froze. The officer's hand, halfway to Malik's pocket, stopped in midair. Amelia took one step. Then another. Her legs trembled violently, but she kept going until she stood between Malik and the officers. "You will not touch him again," she said, her voice shaking with fury. The moment hung in the air, an impossible, defiant image. A girl everyone believed could never stand, now standing for someone the world refused to see as worth protecting. The officers exchanged glances. The cameras kept rolling. And for the first time, the balance of power seemed to shift, not because the system had changed, but because enough people were watching. Still, Amelia knew this wasn't over. Even as the officers stepped back, muttering into their radios, the undercurrent of danger remained. Malik's life, her legs, both fragile, both newly awakened, both now in the center of a storm that neither of them could yet see the end of. What happened next would decide whether this moment was a miracle to be remembered, or the spark that lit a far more dangerous fire. The officers left without an arrest that day, but not without leaving a mark. Malik stood silently beside Amelia, his eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered. Phones were still raised. Strangers still whispered. And somewhere in the mix of faces, Amelia saw a truth she couldn't unsee. Some were stunned by what she had done, but others looked at Malik with the same suspicion as before. They walked, Amelia, shakily, Malik steadying her, to the park bench. Her legs burned, every muscle trembling from the effort, but she didn't care. For the first time, she had felt what it was like to stand, not just in body, but in purpose. In the days that followed, the video spread. News anchors replayed the footage of the surgeon's daughter rising from her wheelchair, standing between a homeless black teenager and the police. Social media lit up, some calling her brave, others questioning Malik's character. Her father, faced with the reality of what had happened, could no longer hide behind polite denials. It wasn't just about Amelia's legs anymore. It was about the truth they had been able to ignore because it had never touched them directly. Malik's world was full of moments like that afternoon, moments that didn't get filmed, didn't go viral, and didn't end with someone stepping in. For Malik, the days were still hard. Prejudice didn't disappear because a video trended. But he was no longer invisible. Donations came in to help him find stable housing. A local physical therapist offered to continue Amelia's training for free, on the condition that Malik could come to teach him job skills in rehabilitation work. For Amelia, every step she took now carried weight. She knew her progress was real, but it wasn't the most important thing she had gained. She had seen the world through Malik's eyes, and that vision couldn't be unlearned. Because this story wasn't just about a girl learning to walk. It was about who gets the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't. Who is seen as worth saving and who is written off before they open their mouth. It was about the quiet, everyday choices people make, choices that either let injustice breathe, or suffocate it. Some would say it was fate that brought them together. Others would call it a miracle. But Amelia knew better. It wasn't fate. It wasn't magic. It was a human decision, a decision to see someone fully, without the fog of prejudice blinding the view. And that's the part too many still get wrong. So maybe the real question isn't whether a black homeless boy helped a rich surgeon's daughter take her first steps. Maybe the question is, when was the last time you stood for someone the world told you to ignore?